John Noe unveils Greater Than We Believe with your host, Stephen King.
Well, hello. It's good to see you again. This is Stephen King and John Noe. We're here presenting our series, Greater Than We Believe. And this week's discussion is still on the subject of hell. It's all based on John's book over here that he wrote in 2011 called Hell Yes, Hell No. And just for fun, I want to read he's always got secondary titles. It says, Hell Yes, Hell No. What really is the extent of God's grace and wrath, because both are involved there. So regardless of what you've been taught all your life about the teaching of hell, we're going through and seeing what the Bible actually says and what it doesn't say. And last week we did a study of etymology on the word hell, where it came from. And if you didn't see that, you need to see that, and probably before you watch this today. So go back and watch that. You'll be surprised, shocked, as John says, shocking discovery of what hell actually means. Today's video is number 204, and it's called Hades and More. And so we had talked about Sheol last week, which is the Hebrew word that has been mistranslated into hell. Mm-hmm. The Greek word is Hades, and we're going to find out about Hades and a few other things. So John, take it from there.
Thank you, Stephen. Hades is the New Testament Greek equivalent of the Old Testament Hebrew Sheol. Mm-hmm. This is confirmed in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, where Sheol is translated as Hades. Mm-hmm. And Hades, like Sheol, refers to things unseen. And that's in common with a resting place for all the dead, mm-hmm. back then and there, i.e. departed souls, spirits, and so forth. In the New Testament, the word Hades occurs 10 times. Matthew 11, 23, 16, 18, Luke 10, 15, 16, 23, Acts 2, 27, and 31, Revelation 1, 18, and 6, 8, and 20, 13, and 14. Mm-hmm. How's that for a quick? 10 times. The King James Version, both the Old and the New King James Version, translates Hades as hell. Mm-hmm. Most modern translations, like the NIV, the NASB, the ASV, and the YLT, Young's Literal Translation, yes, leave it untranslated mm-hmm. as Hades.
Right.
Big difference.
Yes.
And red flag, folks.
Yes.
Something's wrong here.
Something's going on.
Something's going on. Or they render it as grave, so that it might be distinguished from hell.
Yes.
Vine's expository dictionary adds these important clarifying remarks. Would you please read, Stephen, for us what I have marked in there on pages 517 and 518?
Yes.
There, if you would, please.
It's under the word Hades. It says, Hades, the region of departed spirits of the lost, but including the blessed dead in periods preceding the ascension of Christ. It says it corresponds to Sheol in the Old Testament. It has been unhappily rendered hell. Yeah, I'm not happy about that either.
Unhappily rendered?
And on page 518
well,
it says,
that's a quite of a mission.
Yeah, absolutely. It never denotes the grave. Nor is it the permanent region of the lost. In point of time, it is, for such, intermediate between the cease and the doom of Gehenna.
No, that tells you a lot about nothing, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it says the signification of the temporary destiny of the doomed.
Yeah. Incorrectly, the Apostles' Creed states that he, Jesus, descended into
hell.
hell. Incorrectly. He descended into Hades.
Yes.
That's the correct translation. And that translation of hell creates a contrary and wrong idea, as we are seeing. Biblically, Christ descended into Hades, as we shall shortly see. But in contrast with Sheol, Hades is not morally neutral. In his parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16:19 through 31, remember the comment that
Yes.
one of our viewers made about, Luke 16:19 and
So that
through
explains
31.
hell. Yeah.
That's where hell's all depicted there. But anyway, and that Lazarus was not the Lazarus that Jesus raised from
Right.
from the dead in John 11. Jesus depicts Hades as a two-compartment holding place of the dead and departed souls awaiting the resurrection, and they are separated by a great gulf,
A chasm.
a great chasm. Lazarus resided in the righteous side, or a place of comfort, called paradise, or Abraham's bosom. The rich man, however, was confined in the unrighteous side, a place of doom and punishment. And indeed, in Jesus' parable, the rich man was suffering back then in Hades and conscious of his punishment. And this depiction is different from what we found when we looked at all the passages relating to Sheol. Some scholars attack this parable, attacked its credibility and its applicability. They contend that while Jesus often taught people in parables or illustrations as a way of them grasping a point or a principle, these stories, and this particular story, were not meant to be taken literally, they claim, as literal accounts or detailed geography, or that it represents an accurate depiction of afterlife reality at that point in time in history. They further claim that Jesus' reference to a two-compartment represents the influence of Greek thought. And consequently, they argue that Jesus' focus here was not upon teaching about literal attributes of the otherworldly afterlife place of the dead called Hades. Rather, it was a fabricated illustration about wealth and poverty, and that was used to ridicule the indifference of the Pharisees and to convey the principle of how they and we should show mercy to those who suffer, and to demonstrate how compassionate to treat people in this life here and now. Three factors, however, mitigate against this reductionistic understanding and criticism. Here they are. Ready?
Okay.
1, why would Jesus use this illustration if he knew it wasn't true? 2, why would he use it if the Pharisees to whom he was talking did not hold to this belief? And 3, why didn't those Pharisees challenge him on this view of Hades and the afterlife if it wasn't true? And the reason is,
Drum roll.
they all held this same view. It coincided with their belief then and there. The first century Jewish historian Josephus confirms this solidarity of belief in his treatise on Hades contained in his works of Josephus here, and that it laid out the most common Jewish position on Hades, Tartarus, and heaven, which was concurrent in Jesus' day as well. And that's read, if you will, turn to that page that I marked in there for you.
13.
And it comes out of an extract of Josephus's discourse to the Greeks concerning Hades.
Okay.
Would you read the portions I got marked there for
The
you?
ones that are circled or all the yellow ones?
The yellow ones.
All the yellow, okay. Now as to Hades, wherein the souls of the righteous and unrighteous are detained, is necessary to speak of it. It says it's a subterraneous region, He also says it's a place of custody for souls in which angels are appointed as guardians to them, who distribute to them temporary punishments agreeable to everyone's behavior.
Now,
and
now
manners.
notice that the two, some is a place of punishments, and the Sheol did not have any kind
Right.
of moral distinction
Right.
or punishment and reward distinction.
Right. And then it also says, it is prepared for a day foredetermined by God, in which one righteous sentence shall deservedly be passed upon all men. A little further down it says, while the just shall obtain an incorruptible and never fading kingdom, these are now indeed confined in Hades, but not in the same place wherein the unjust are confined.
2 compartments.
Yes. And down here it says, while they wait for that rest and eternal new life in heaven, which is to succeed this region, this place we call the bosom of Abraham. But as to the unjust, they are dragged by force to the left hand of the angels, allotted for punishment. And over here it says, this is the discourse between Hades, wherein the souls of all men are confined until a proper season, which God hath determined, when he will make a resurrection of all men from the dead.
So that was back in Jesus' day and time. And that's what the situation, how the situation existed there. The Jewish Talmud also contains a sizable amount of material, Stephen, and sheds more light on this popular view of Hades in the in Judaism back at that time. Additionally, modern-day scholars and authors like Edersheim and Schaff and others have documented this view. And in a nutshell, therefore, Jesus' parable illustration in Luke 16 is an accurate representation of the first century Jewish view of this temporary place of separation of all the dead, righteous and unrighteous, separated with a gap. And there the righteous awaited a Redeemer to remove them from Sheol / Hades and take them to heaven. And yet confusion about the afterlife permeates the church today. Once again, Senior Pastor Edwin Lutzer, in his book 1 Minute After You Die, exemplifies this confusion when he writes in here, at this time, no one is yet in hell. Someday Hades will be thrown into hell. But that has yet not happened. This book was written, when was it written? Not yet would be 1997. As yet, not happened. But after the ascension of Christ, believers are said to go directly to heaven. In other words, the two regions of Hades no longer exist side by side. There is reason to believe that Abraham's bosom is in heaven today, according to Pastor Lutzer. Hades, as far as we know, now has only one region. So the bad guys are still stuck there. And that it's where unbelievers enter. I believe it is still an abode for departed spirits, a temporary intermediate state where those who have not received God's forgiveness must wait until further notice. Oh, man. See how messed up we are?
Yep.
Oh, goodness. All right. For Pastor Lutzer, then, the rich man in Hades, whom Jesus mentioned in his Luke 16 parable, is still there waiting for the final judgment of the lake of fire. And when that supposed future time comes, the news that awaits him will not be encouraging, according to Pastor Luther. But what if, Stephen, what if that time of judgment already came? 19 centuries ago, exactly as and when Jesus specified, and every New Testament writer and the early church expected, as they were guided into all truth and told about the things to come by the Holy Spirit. John 16:13. and Pastor Luther, as well as most Bible reading and Bible believing Christians, have just missed it. So let's take a look at the emptying out of Hades. Does that sound like fun?
Sound like great fun.
A quick look, but an alternative view. It's a chronologically highlighted recap of how the righteous side of Hades may already have been emptied out over 19 centuries ago. First, and immediately after his crucifixion, Jesus descended into Hades, the righteous side of the holding place of the spirit soul of the dead. And it was not a place of torment, nor was it hell. That's a mistranslation. Jesus didn't go to hell for 3 days and 3 nights. We know this from Acts 2, 27 and 31, where Peter directly quotes from Psalm 16:10 regarding Sheol. We also know that Jesus spent the better part of 3 days and 3 nights there. Matthew 12:40. During that time, between his death and resurrection, he preached to the spirits of the righteous dead held captive in that prison. 1 Peter 3:19 through 20, 4 through 6, and Ephesians 4:9. But this understanding of these passages is contested. Secondly, Jesus came out of Hades via his resurrection from the dead and in fulfillment of David's Psalm 16:10 prophecy that the Messiah would not be left in Hades and his body would not see decay. Third, and next, is the first fruits group was raised from the dead according to the scriptures. Would you please read Matthew 27:51 through 53 so that our viewers will see that I'm not making this stuff up?
At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs were broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life.
Notice it's holy people, not the unrighteous. Okay.
They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people.
After Jesus' resurrection.
Right.
Because Jesus had to be the first.
Right.
And then them. But that happened back then and there. The resurrection of the dead is now underway. Here's the first fruits of it, following that typology. Isn't that something? And most Christians today are still waiting for the resurrection of the dead.
Most Christians never heard about this either.
And there's more to this story. Fourth, when Jesus ascended on high, he led captives in his train, or led captivity captive. Ephesians 4:8. Up into heaven with him. This very well could have been these people right here. Very well. That first fruits group from Matthew 27:51 through 53. Fifth, on the last day singular. John 6:39, 40, 44, 54, and John 11:24. That last day singular of those last days plural. Hebrews 1:2. The rest of the harvest of the dead souls there in Hades, on the righteous side at least, were taken out of that compartment, bypassed earth. They didn't get the same treatment as the first fruits did, like the first fruits of typology of the harvest every year. They got paraded through the streets, wrapped up and bundled and put ribbons around and took into the Holy of Holies and waved. As
It's a wave offering,
the rest of the harvest didn't get that kind of treatment. Right. Well, neither did this harvest of dead souls. They were raised out, taken out of the righteous compartment of Hades, bypassed earth, and were transported directly to heaven to receive their judgment of rewards, loss, or punishment. Hebrews 9:27 and 1 Corinthians 3:10 through 15. Check those out, folks. And their new spiritual bodies. 1 Corinthians 15:44, which God gives. 1 Corinthians 15:38. Regardless of whether you think this has already happened, as I do, or is yet to happen, as most Christians do, the biblical fact is this: the righteous side of Hades either was or will someday be emptied out by Jesus. who is the living one, and was dead, and is now alive forevermore, praise God, and holds the keys to death and
Hades.
Hades. He has the keys, still does. This past or yet future fulfillment leaves us with only the unrighteous compartment of Hades still occupied. So what was that? Or is it still to happen? And to become the hell that we're looking for? Scripture tells us that they too were to be resurrected. Read Daniel. Go to Daniel real quick. I didn't give you this one. Go to Daniel 12:2. I'm not making this up either. What was or still is this happening that most Christians don't believe has happened yet at all? Daniel 12:2.
Daniel 12:2 says, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt.
That would cover both sides of it. And yet, that was written prior to Jesus even coming. That's all prophecy. But here we're seeing that at least the righteous side is underway.
Yes.
All right. 30-some years after Jesus and the first fruits resurrection, the Apostle Paul makes this nearness declaration during his defense before the governor Felix. He said, "There will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked." Acts 14:15. Unfortunately, this familiar translation is also a traitor. The original Greek literally reads, Stephen, there is to be about to be. A resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. From where? From Hades. There is to be about to be. Paul says, this double intensification of imminency or nearness language is missed by all reductionistic will be translations. So, then where did or where will someday the souls of the unrighteous go? When resurrected out of that other compartment of the Hadean realm. John, in the Bible's last book of Revelation, tells us that that death and Hades itself, as well as those whose names not found written in the book of life, would be thrown into the lake of fire. Revelation 20:13 through 15. So once again, and regardless of one's eschatological view, past or future fulfillment, Revelation's lake of fire is the final destination and surviving reality for Hades and those spirits sold still contained within it back then and there at that time and in our time today, here and now. Contrary to much popular belief, this emptying out of Hades and its being cast into the lake of fire was precisely what Jesus was talking about when he proclaimed and prophesied during his earthly ministry that the gates of Hades will not overcome it, i.e. his church. Matthew 16:18. He was not, as is usually assumed, talking about evil forces operating in our physical world. It is further possible that this casting of death and Hades and non-believers into the lake of fire was also what the Apostle Paul was talking about when he prophesied that the last enemy to be destroyed would be death. 1 Corinthians 15:26. Vines. Do I have vines?
Vines right here.
Oh, vines. Oh, yeah, vine. Look at vine. Vines, Expository Dictionary, defines death, Stephen, as this. Let me read it here. The separation of the soul from the body, the separation of man from God, and especially notes that death never denotes non-existence. Therefore, Hades, that temporary abode of the dead, that realm of the departed, the unseen world of disembodied spirits was viewed by the Jews of Jesus' day as a place of separation of the soul from the presence of God. But someday, this was to change as part of God's plan of redemption. And even though Christians largely and correctly agree that Christ defeated sin on the cross with his resurrection, the Hadean realm remained operative throughout the New Testament. This is why, in my opinion, the afterlife place of Hades probably was Paul's last enemy. And not physical death itself. For as the boy and the man who died once and then faced judgment. That goes on. But this last enemy of the holding place of the departed souls was to be changed, be rectified. And the Bible plainly teaches, though, that man is destined to die once and then face judgment, Hebrews 9:27. This reality does not change. What changes or changed was the emptying out of Hades, and it's being cast into the lake of fire. What is the lake of fire? We'll get there.
Yeah, I love it.
Hadean death, that separation, was the only remaining obstacle standing between the saints and their post-mortem entrance into the presence of God in heaven. Again, it either was or still is destined to be defeated on the last day.
Yes.
Now, doesn't this exposition better explain scripturally and historically why death and Hades are so closely associated in the book of Revelation?
Yes.
Revelation 1:18, 6, 8, 20, 13 through 15. Fact is, Hades was to the spirit's soul sequestered there a separation from God and the temple, where he dwelled on earth at that time, and what the grave was to the body, which was a separation of the soul. But then on the last day, singular, of those last days, plural, everything changed. Or, if you prefer to defer this 19 centuries and counting, someday all this stuff will happen depending on your eschatological view. In my opinion, Hades was completely emptied out by Jesus, who holds the keys to death and Hades, Revelation 1:18, who had been there before for the better part of 3 days and 3 nights. And next, Hades was thrown into the lake of fire along with those still in it. Revelation 20, 13 through 15. Of course, most Christians believe that all these things are yet to happen. But past or future, this last enemy of death, i.e. separation from God in the Hadean realm, was or will be someday absorbed into the lake of fire. Again, what is the lake of fire? We'll get there.
Yeah.
Don't miss our future videos. It's coming. If, however, my past fulfillment view is correct, no saint is still sequestered in the righteous side of Hades today. Think that's good news?
That's great news.
Waiting for a future resurrection day and the opening of heaven. See again, John 3:13. Then does Hades still exist if it's in the lake of fire today? Or will it still exist when it goes into the lake of fire someday? Is it still operative as it was in Bible times? We'll discuss the lake of fire in our next video. And the question of who does or who does not go in it later in our video series. If I were you, I wouldn't want to miss our next video.
I wouldn't either. Thank you, John. Wow, that's a lot. A lot to consume. But I believe that the worm is turning. I believe people are starting to think, yeah, something going on.
The worm is turning?
Yeah, that's an expression.
Oh.
Anyway, so I don't have next week's theme yet. I'm sure you'll have it for me by then, but please come back and see us next week, folks, and enjoy the series. Keep an open mind. There's a lot. The thing is, as we do this, it opens more questions. And as the questions are opened, we need to address them. So we're far from finished. And the questions that are coming to your mind now, we're going to get to those at some point or another. So just hang in there, and we'll see you next week. God bless you. We'll see you then.